some people have never been taught to write in their books, or have been taught not to write in books, or have no idea what to write in them. If that's the case for you, this very short presentation should be a helpful introduction to that most pleasant of vandalism's writing in your book. First, we need to talk about why you would want to write in your book, which, by the way, is often called annotating a text, which sounds a lot fancier. First of all, and most importantly, writing in your book creates a written record of your thoughts as you're reading. And then you can use that record in a lot of different ways. For instance, you can use it in our class discussions. If I ask you, what did you think of this character? Or did you have any questions? You can look back and find where you wrote down what you thought of a character or where you had a question. It's also useful in writing your papers. You can go back and find what you've highlighted and use those important passages for quotations in your paper. So it can save a lot of time as you're working on developing your essays. For the same reason, it can be used to review for your tests. You can find important passages, you can remember characters and what they did, all more quickly than just rereading the whole thing over and over again. And finally, and this is what I've found the most entertaining in my own books as I write in them, is your future self. If you ever read this again, you can find what you thought of it in the margins. And it's like resuming an interrupted conversation right where you left off. And it's sometimes interesting to see how you've changed over time. The other reason to write in your book is because it makes you a more attentive reader than you would otherwise be. This quotation is from Mortimer Adler, and he says, "The physical act of writing with your own hand brings words and sentences more sharply before your mind and preserves them better in your memory. To set down your reaction to important words and sentences you have read, and the questions they have raised in your mind, is to preserve those reactions and sharpen those questions." In other words, by actually having written something down about a particular passage, you remember it better than if you had just read it without writing anything. If you write down your question, pick up a pencil and write down your question, you're far more likely to remember that question than if you hadn't done it. So again, this is going to help you in your class discussions and in your tests because it will help you to recall the things from the text even better than before. So this right here is a picture I took of a page from my own copy of Agamemnon to give you an idea of what it might look like when you write in your book. And obviously it has some of the highlighting and writing that was in it originally, and I've added some things once it was on my computer, just to give you a better idea of the different kinds of things you could do. Now if you look at the highlighting up in the top left, here's what I highlighted as I was reading. "And now it goes as it goes, and where it ends is fate. And neither by singeing flesh, nor tipping cups of wine, nor shedding burning tears can you enchant away the rigid fury." Now, what struck me as I read that? Well, it seemed to be a pretty good summing up of the attitude of a particular character, or in this case a set of characters, because it's the chorus who's speaking, to an important idea in this play, namely fate. They're kind of summarizing what's going to happen, what they think about the idea of fate, and that's also why I wrote it over there in orange, so I might be able to find it again when I'm looking for passages about fate. I also wrote over there in the margin inevitability, because that sort of is a summary of what they're saying about fate, namely that nothing you can do, none of these things, burning flesh, spilling wine, shedding tears, will change anything. What's going to happen is going to happen, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so that helps me crystallize my understanding of what they're saying in that passage. If you look a little further down on that page, you'll see a blue question mark. And so perhaps as I was reading, I read this passage. "We are aged past aging, gloss of the leaf shriveled, 3 legs at a time we falter on." At this point, I might have had a question. like, what do you mean 3 legs? These are like human beings, so are they like as an image of a dog that's lame or something? What exactly do they mean by saying 3 legs at a time? So when I ask in class, did you have any questions, you'd be able to open your book, flip through, find this question mark, and say, hey, what did they mean by 3 legs at a time? What is that significant? What does that mean? Okay. If you look at the top of the next page, you can see that I wrote fire and light over there in the margin. And looking at the text, it says, Argos blazes, torches race the sunrise up her skies. What happened is that I noticed, hey look, there are 3 different kinds of light in those 2 lines, right? Blazing fire, torches, and sunrise. And since light and fire are a repeated image throughout this play, and also, incidentally, it's something I'm going to be telling you to look for as you read, I noted it in the margin. So if you're looking to write, or say, for example, write about images of fire and light in a paper, you would be able to find this one pretty readily just flipping through your book. Now further down, that first orange highlighted passage, that's another example of me kind of summing up what they're saying to make it easier for me to remember. It says, the gods breathe power through my song. My fighting strength, persuasion, grows with the years. And what I wrote is that power equals persuasion, because what these old men of the chorus are saying is that their power is in their ability to persuade people. They don't have the fighting strength of young men, but they have their own kind of fighting strength in their persuasion, and it actually gets stronger as they get older as opposed to getting weaker, which is what you would assume about fighting strength. So I write in the margin, power equals persuasion, so I can remember that idea. And finally, down at the bottom, I have an orange exclamation point. And if you can see why I have an exclamation point. It says murdered children. That's certainly a surprising sort of thing. Here's what the passage says. They plunged their claws in a hare, a mother bursting with unborn young, the babies spilling quick spurts of blood, cut off the race, just dashing into life. That's a really shocking and violent image. So I wrote an exclamation point because that's what I was thinking as I was reading it. Like, wow, that's a pretty vivid image of murdered children. Maybe that's going to be important later on. So this gives you an example of what you might see on any one page as you're reading. Not all pages will have this much, especially when we get into longer works like novels. You might have several pages at a time without anything on them. But by and large, you should be writing in your books a lot. You should be annotating your text pretty heavily because that's what's really going to help you in our class discussions, in our papers, and in your tests. So just to review, here are the different kinds of things you could write in your book. Highlighting is obviously one of the main ones. As you read, you look for passages that are significant and you highlight them. These might include quotations that illuminate a character's motivations. They establish an important theme, for example, that section on fate we looked at, or develop a repeated image. Okay. Passages that seem really important, you could even mark with an extra star or something similar. What I don't recommend is that you highlight large blocks of text, for example, more than 10 or 15 lines at a time. At that point, you're highlighting half a page, and you're kind of defeating the purpose because it doesn't help you pinpoint exactly what's useful in that passage because you have to read, a page worth of text before you find what it was that you thought was important. Okay. The other thing you can write in your book are questions and comments. These might be the most important types of annotations because they reflect your own response to the work as you read it. They can include responses like the question mark we had to mark something confusion, exclamation points to mark surprise, even smiley faces to mark something funny. You can note specific questions you have, like why is she so mad at him, or what was she thinking? And you can also note your literary devices or themes here. Say you can mark something as a metaphor or an epic simile, and that will help you find it again if you need to talk about it in class. Some other things you can write, these are not going to be as useful. These are kind of as you personally need them. Plot notes, brief summaries to help remind you what happened. This can be useful if we're in an especially complicated book. These plot notes can happen at the beginning of a chapter, at the top of a page, just saying, here's what happened in this section. And as we said before, just the fact of writing it down will help you remember that that's what happened. And definitions. You're almost certainly going to come across some words you don't know as we work our way through the year. If you find a word you don't know, look it up, and then write the definition in the book. So the next time you come across it, you have it right there, and you know exactly what it means, and you don't have to try to remember. So it expands your vocabulary, and obviously helps you understand the work a little better. So that's it. Good luck. Get started with your reading of Agamemnon. So I have one more note that's going to help you as we begin our class. And these are the terms we use when talking about literature generally. And one of the most important terms that we're going to use is genre. And genre simply means type, and in this case, a type of literature. Now, there are kind of big overarching genres like novel and poem and play. And this is probably what we'll most often be using. But you have to remember that these are all completely different things. Everything that's published in a book form is not a novel. A novel is a specific kind of literature. It's a prose, fictional story, and it wasn't invented until about 1600 AD or so. So Agamemnon is not a novel. It's a play. And in our other lecture, I'm going to explain to you about the characteristics of this particular genre. And as I introduce new genres, I'll explain to you what their major characteristics are and the kinds of subgenres there are. For example, plays are usually divided into comedy and tragedy, and sometimes history plays as well. So those are the types of literature we'll be dealing with. When I talk about elements of literature, these are the parts or pieces that make up a work of literature or that make it work right. So examples of this would be plot, character, setting, point of view. These are all the pieces that are in almost every work of literature, with the exception of maybe some types of poetry. But they're all going to be there. So that's what I mean by elements of literature. Now, when I talk about literary techniques or literary devices, that regards how something is written. Authors are always attempting to create some kind of effect in their reader. They're trying to accomplish something, and they do that by changing they choose how their words and how their sentences are arranged, what images they use to achieve that effect. So some of these techniques or devices, we'll be talking about many of them over the course of the year. Some of them are very concrete, like alliteration, which is a technique that repeats the initial sound at the beginnings of words. Some of them are more abstract, like, say, parallelism, which sort of kind of imitates sentence structure in other parts of the work. And some can be both, like irony, which is something we're going to talk about soon, is a literary device that is sort of both concrete and more abstract at the same time. A motif is a repeated idea or image that shows up sort of throughout the whole work. And it doesn't always mean the same thing every time. Its meaning can sort of change based on its circumstances or who it's applied to or what happens involving this idea or image. But we're going to be talking about the motif of fire and light in our very first week. And a theme, finally, is a generalized statement that can be inferred from the work. So you're not going to be talking about the plot and characters of this particular book in a theme. A theme is a statement about life in general that you can sort of get from this particular work. Now, it's not quite a moral because we're not dealing with, Aesop's fables here. But it's sort of like the takeaway of this particular work, what stays with you, or what it's trying to say beyond its immediate concerns with its own characters, its own plot. And you're going to be asked about the theme of Agamemnon in your first paper. So this is a concept that's going to be pretty important for you. Okay, that's what you need to know for our first week of class. See you then.